Welcome to the Job Shop Show, where we talk with the owners, suppliers, partners, and customers of custom manufacturers. Listen and learn the secrets of top-performing job shops, the tools, techniques, and backgrounds that have made them successful, all in the quest of raising the bar for custom manufacturing. I'm your host, Jay Jacobs. This episode is sponsored by Paperless Parts, connecting buyers and suppliers of custom manufactured parts. The Paperless platform is a secure, ITAR-compliant, cloud-based manufacturing system for suppliers that reduces the amount of time spent on sales, estimating, quoting, administration, and order processing. It offers seamless integration with the accounting and ERP software tools that shops already use, such as QuickBooks, E2, and JobBoss. Paperless Parts was founded with a mission to make manufacturing more accessible by streamlining the quote-to-cash process. Spend less time quoting and more time selling.
Shazam! We are back with another episode of the Job Shop Show. Today we are speaking with Tom Jendick, president and owner of Rochester, Michigan-based Metalmite. Rochester is 20 miles outside of Detroit. Metalmite is a full-service machine shop, and Tom is a second-generation owner as well as a third-generation machinist. We will talk about the handing off of a business from one generation to another from the son perspective, as well as gears and splines, a specialty of theirs, and very tricky parts to machine. Welcome to the Job Shop Show, Tom.
Thank you, Jay. I'm happy to be here.
What has been keeping you busy lately?
Well, lately it's been the same. It's been the same story for Metalmite. We try to answer our customers' tough challenges and come up with a solution that makes them happy. And we're continuing to do that even today.
Any particular challenges that customers have thrust upon you lately?
Oh, yes, there's plenty to think of. Our challenges can range from one part that just has never been made before, which is a typical prototype job shop part. Mm-hmm. Metalmite it sort of has a niche with 5 and 6 axis machinery, so you get a lot of parts that have those angles and those the things that a typical 3-axis mill or 2-axis lathe can't do. But I think our 50 plus year history has sort of earned us a reputation, and we get the phone call after they've tried 2 or 3 shops, and typically the referrals we get are from other machine shops, which is sort of a unique position we're in.
Well, that's a great reputation to have, for sure.
It is, and we don't take that lightly. We certainly appreciate the respect the other shops give us. I was talking to friend and fellow business owner Jason Ray from Paperless Parts last week, mm-hmm. and I said to him I had to get going because I was walking into one of our best customers is American Axle and Manufacturing in the Detroit area, and they had sent out, I didn't realize they had sent it out to multiple or all their suppliers. They'd sent out kind of a cry for help. They're looking for a backup plan on a production part for the F-150, mm-hmm. which most of us know is the best-selling Ford product right now.
Right.
And so I don't do production at all. I'm not even certified with the ATIF certification you need to make production parts. But I had responded and said I'd be glad to take a look at it. So I walked into the meeting, and the production manager thanked me and said I'm the only supplier that responded when they asked everybody for help. And I said, oh. And we sat and listened, and it was a very complicated issue. They bought a 2 very specialized machines to machine this in production. And Ford said to them that they liked the setup, but they wanted them to have a contingency plan, a backup plan. Mm-hmm. And they had none. So they were asking a supplier to look. And so I'm sitting in the room looking at it, and they're saying, well, we got to make 400 parts a day or per shift, and they want me to run, 3 shifts. And so we were looking at the issue. At the end of the day, a couple of people asked me, why did you respond to this? And I said, well, it sounds like you have a problem. And to try to help. So we're putting some things together, and I'm submitting them a proposal this week to try to help them out.
Could be a fantastic opportunity.
That's how we look at it. It's not just about making money. I think my grandfather always said that's a byproduct of doing the right things and doing things right. The byproduct was making money, and so that's how I kind of look at it.
Definitely want to get back to the family history in machining, but before we delve into that and to the gears and splines, you had mentioned that you made a purchase with the mindset of that it was an investment, not an expense. And I was really struck by that, as I see your mindset as a growth mindset, a belief in a world of abundance, whereas a expense mindset is more of a belief in scarcity and really being more concerned with failure. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Obviously, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I can say I was wired a certain way right from the womb, I guess, and so I know my way of thinking. I've been blessed and wise enough to surround myself with people that have the other point of view, so we try to get a more well-rounded view. So I have plenty of the people around me who have the ROI calculators out every second and trying to figure out if we're going to have enough, work to pay for this machine. But when it came to new technology in our shop, really, you talked about the generational thing. When my father started the shop, Metal Mite, 50 years ago, he was doing conventional machining, as everybody in Detroit was, a mill, lathe, and he had a grinder. And very quickly he realized he was a one-man shop in the basement with 5 kids running around upstairs with his wife, and he very quickly realized he needed to get some automation. So he was one of the first of all his peers to invest in CNC equipment, and everybody told him he was crazy, that there's no way a computer can run a machine, and that they'll never outpace a person that can calculate trig and whatever. So he became very good friends with the importer in Detroit for Morisiki equipment, and at one point we had over 31 Morisiki machines in our shop.
Wow.
And in the 1990s, Dr. Mori, the owner of Morisiki, he sent his son to Detroit specifically to come to Metal Mite to see a machine that we had that they never got a chance to look at in Japan, and they wanted to see it on the field. So
right.
We thought that was ironic, but we gave them the royal treatment and showed them how great the machine was. So, with handing that baton off, my dad saw where technology was going to bridge gaps. He was a great machinist himself and an engineer from University of Detroit, but he knew that the human mind and the human calculations could only go so far. He saw that these CNC machines were definitely going to be the future, and so my opportunity to work alongside him for 20 plus years. When I first started my career in the late 90s with him, he said, let's buy some of these 5-axis machines. And I said, Dad, they're 2 to 3 times what every other machine on the market costs, and not many people are buying them, and nobody can program them. And so he did the typical thing, as he and I would have a meeting. He went and bought 2, and we figured out very quickly that it made a niche for Metal Mite, that everybody sort of associated us as that shop. Maybe we didn't realize they were associating us as a shop that was crazy enough to buy 2 5-axis mills, but they were quickly our busiest machines. We had backlogs on them, 3 and 4 months long, and so then we followed up with some 6-axis mill turn combos, and again we've got contracts in there with Bell Helicopter and a couple aerospace companies, and so again just doing product that a conventional shop cannot do. So when you ask me if it was a 3D printer, why did I do it? I lost my dad 6 years ago to cancer,
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you. But following in his footsteps, we looked at some of the new technologies, and obviously additive manufacturing is the buzzword. Mm-hmm. And I had been keenly watching some of the EOS products and 3D systems and all the top runners for probably a good 10, 15 years. And the barrier to entry was just too great. I mean, we were talking $1 million, $1.5 million per machine. So a small shop like us didn't make any sense. And I started getting requests from customers asking, do you know anything about, additive? And it's interesting. Our company's called Metal Mite, but we actually make quite a bit of plastic parts. And so SLS became very interesting to us, glass-filled nylon. SLS is selective laser sintering. Mm-hmm. And so we found a couple shops.
I'm sorry? You bought a 3D printer that's producing plastic parts, not metal parts.
Well, so the first machine I got is a Markforged plastic printer. Yes, carbon fiber and nylon.
Okay.
And then I waited 3 months and I bought a steel printer. So I have a direct 3D Systems DMP, Direct Metal Printing 300. At one time, it was one of the largest that they made. It's a 10-inch by 10-inch by 13-inch cubic volume there. So any steel parts that fit inside that volume, we can print, and we can print them out of stainless steel, tool steel, or titanium.
And what density do they come out of the machine?
So I don't know the calculations of density. We just had a group of engineers in last week making actually I can't talk about the product. We had to sign an NDA, but their product, the success of it is all based on density. And they actually said the 3D printed product has a more pure density and solid form than any machined product because of the natural flaws in the bars from the mill process. So they've been doing a lot of this ultrasonic testing and x-rays and looking at the grains and internal, and they said a 3D printed part is as pure as you can get because you're printing if you picture one grain of sand at a time and one layer at a time all the way up, and you have no cavities, no voids, and no flaw. So yeah, it's interesting that you asked that. It's a pure product.
How does that complement the traditional machining? Where do you use 3D printing? Because I know a lot of shops are looking into it. Some have purchased printers, and the Markforged is more of an entry level, but you made the jump to the more expensive 3D Systems printer. So again, how do those fit in with your customer base? What are you doing with them?
For sure. To be honest, only in our first year of doing it, the Markforged printer, as you said, I think was less than $15,000. And I'm fortunate enough, one of my guys that works for me actually had the little Costco or Sam's Club 3D printer at home. And so he's one of these. He brought it in, and within a few weeks, we had several projects going out the door. And I guess that's where that mentality comes in, where you talk about investment mentality. I looked at it as I knew there would be a need for it. I knew it would fulfill a purpose, but I wasn't sure what it was. I could not calculate how many parts someone would order or how much we charge for this part. Mm-hmm. And so in the first weeks we had the Markforged, a customer called, as you alluded to in the intro, we do a lot of gear and shaft projects, being in the Detroit area. I think there's just a lot of gear work. Mm-hmm. And so one of my customers had made a gearbox, and as is typical, they prototype it and they propose it for a certain vehicle. And it didn't get picked up by that customer. So this project sat on the shelf. Now another customer has come 5 years later, very interested in the gearbox, but as chance would have it, the gearbox has to be mounted on the opposite side of the area that the transfer case where it would be going. Mm-hmm. So by default, the original design allowed oil to be fed by gravity down on top of the gears. By moving this to the other side, because of how it fits in the vehicle, there's no oil getting on the gears. And so anyone who knows anything about gears, that's typically a bad thing if you're running metal on metal with no lubricant.
Right.
So they called me in a panic. They had sold one of these test units to a customer. The customer was getting ready to mount it on a vehicle and run a test. And they said, oh my gosh, the oil goes by gravity to the wrong side. It's not going to get any oil on these gears. Mm-hmm. And I said, what's the solution? And they said, and they designed sort of works like a sprinkler. It's a plate with some holes in it. They wanted to mount it to the front of the gear, and as the oil touched that surface, it would just get slung. It's called a slinger. Would sling the oil to the outskirts of the gear. So they designed it, and they said, how long would it take to machine this? Well, the part seemed simple enough. It actually had some 5-axis holes where the oil came internally through the shaft and then shot out. And I said, guys, we're looking at 3 weeks before my machine opens up to do that. And they said, oh my gosh, we're going to lose this ginormous sale. And I said, well, if I can throw it out there, I can print this for you and have it tomorrow. I can hand it to you on your way into work tomorrow. And they said, what are you talking about? And I said, I can print it out of carbon fiber. It'll have all the internal holes. It's ready to go. You just bolt it on the gear when you get to work. So he took me up on it, and he was blown away. He did not know he could get a functioning part overnight like that. And that was us having the printer, for a week at that point.
That's a huge win. So again, it's a investment mindset because you didn't have ROI planned out, and if you looked at it as an expense, you never would have bought it because you wouldn't know how you were going to pay for it, and it might just sit there and never make any money. But you had the conviction and that mindset of abundance. So that is huge. The way I always look at it too is sometimes you, just like in the stock market, if people are buying stocks, you make investments, and some of them you don't win on. You lose money, but others you make money, and typically you come out ahead. And you have to make a bunch of investments. Some will be good, some will be bad, but you have to look at it as they are investments. And perhaps another way of saying it is investment is more about the future, where an expense is the past. You make that purchase and it's gone. So I want to.
Yeah, and
Sure.
I was just going to add to that I think the difference in playing the stock market or in entrepreneurship or small business is, I personally never been very good at playing the stock market, but I am at entrepreneurship because I can change the results, right? I can make the decisions. And so, to me, playing the stock market is a little bit like, betting on horses at the Kentucky Derby. You're kind of hoping that the trainer and the horse and everything did what it was supposed to do. But in entrepreneurship, I am the trainer, and in some cases, I am the horse, right? So makes it a little different.
That is a great point, Tom, because I remember when I started the company, I had friends and other folks putting out there that I was doing something that was very risky. And in my mind, just as you said, it didn't seem risky because I was controlling the decisions and I could affect the outcome, as opposed to the stock market. Or if you're working at a big company and somewhere there's a corporate decision that they no longer need to have your division around and you get laid off. So that was a great point.
Risk with everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about splines and gears. And I don't really know anything about them besides the fact that I would tell my shop that we never want to make these because they are tricky parts to make. There's all sorts of nuances. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're not going to produce good parts and you're going to make the customers upset. So maybe you could define, I think I know what a gear is, but what is a spline?
So that is the age-old question, and I can't. I should probably have better notes in front of me for that exact definition. But I will tell you this: the difference when we talk about splines and gears. A spline is a fixed number of teeth around a diameter, and so some very smart people, 100 years ago, came up with what's called an involute spline. And if you can kind of picture a varying number of radiuses making sort of an elliptical arch. Mm-hmm. That's what an involute spline looks like on a shadow graph or on a blow up sectional view. And the reason that's important is because as two of those mesh against each other, you're constantly making contact on that surface. That long elliptical radius is making surface. So if you pictured square spline teeth around a shaft, which there are some in industry that use that, and you put that in a car driving down the road, you would hear this clanging and rattling where the gears are meshing and then not touching, and then the surface is not always in contact.
Sure.
And shockingly, people just don't like cars that make that much noise driving down the road. So they came up with the involute spline, and I believe, someone could Google this and prove me wrong, but I believe it was a guy by the name of Fellows who also came up with the gear shaping machine and the early gear hobbing machines. Mm-hmm. And I think he was out in the Connecticut area. He was sort of this mathematical genius guy that was a little Einstein in his own little building there. And the rest of the world had no idea what he was talking about, how he figured out all these elliptical arcs and how they mesh and how they didn't. So he dumbed it down to what I call a McDonald's ordering menu. He literally made a gear chart, and any dummy, including me, in a shop can walk up to a gear chart and say, well, if it's this diameter, this pitch, that's a 16.4, or that's a 36.2. You can go over to a Fellows gear shaper, and they have what's called a change gear. You pull it out of the box, the number the chart told you to grab, you plop it in there, and it cuts that exact gear, that exact profile. So he took his genius and he dumbed it down for the rest of the world to use it. And then guys like me came along and learned enough about gears that all the rest of the world just knows they need them. And sort of like you said, they just know, most of their shops know enough about them to say, well, I don't know, it seems tricky, and if this elliptical thing's not right, they're going to all be scrap, and when nobody really has these gear checkers because they're expensive, and so we're just not going to make them. So many of the shops don't make them, but then there's a few shops like me that say it's really not that complicated thanks to guys like Fellows.
What types of gears and splines are there out there? And I have to say, by the way, that on your website, you have some great pictures of parts, but there's all sorts of different splines and gears in parts. So maybe you could just talk about some of the common ones and which ones are easier to manufacture, which ones are more difficult.
Absolutely. So an interesting story, and I'll try hard not to slip and say any company names so I don't indemnify myself or anybody. But being in the Detroit area, as I said, there's a lot of gear people. There's when you talk about types of gears, there's a AGMA, AGMA, American Gear Manufacturing Association. AGMA has a series of levels for how, I guess I'll say, accurate or how tightly held a gear is. So we talk about an AGMA 8, an AGMA 9, an AGMA 10. These are normal gears that are in trucks and cars around town. Because in Metal Mite in the 80s, we made a switch and started doing a lot of aerospace work, the aerospace world, as we start talking about the Rolls-Royce, the Bell helicopter, the little bit more fancier gearboxes than the dump trucks and the pickup trucks around town, we get into AGMA 11 and 12. And what this is, if someone Googles it, they'll see, when you look at this chart, it's basically the report can print out on one 8.5 and 11 page, but it's a series of boxes. And you usually have 3 boxes down the left, 3 boxes down the right, and you take an average. It's sort of like looking at your blood test results after you get a physical or something. And they take, in one side, they'll take the average of the high and low peaks on your gear, and then you get a number of that. Then another one, they take the surface finish of that gear, whether it's ground or machined or shaper cut. Then, so there's those 6 reads. They average all 6 together for a score, and then that's how you come up with this meets AGMA 11, this meets AGMA 12. The crazy thing about that chart is, of all those 6 areas, if one of them is an AGMA 8 and the other 5 are AGMA 12 or 13, they call it an AGMA 8 gear. So it's always considered the number of the lowest score. So I would have been in big trouble in school if my middle school teacher had graded me on that curve. I would have been in a lot of trouble. But that's how the gear industry works.
So one of the terms I saw was a face spline. What is for example, a face spline? So
it's interesting you asked that. So the year my dad decided to buy the 5-axis mill, we had a customer come to us and they said, we want to put a face spline on a large gear. And I said exactly what you said. What the heck are you talking about? And they said, well, essentially we have this gear and it drives the rear wheels of this large military truck. And I said, okay. And they said, we want to push a lever forward and engage the front wheels, so therefore shifting it into front wheel drive. And I said, okay, that doesn't sound complicated. I think there are 4-wheel drive vehicles out there. And they said, yeah, but we want to do it at 50 miles an hour. We want to be driving this large, 10-ton truck through the desert at 50 miles an hour. And we want to hit a button and shift into 4-wheel drive. And I said, that doesn't work. Everything shatters and breaks. And they said, well, we're trying to change that. So they came up with what's called a face spline. So in the past, what there was various components joining that rear wheel to the set of front wheels, and you sort of had this drive shaft in the middle of the truck, down, between the engines always up front, and for whatever reason, we always have engines in front, and we drive wheels in back. And I think, Henry Ford started that way, so everyone just thought that was a good idea. But now when you want to engage those front wheels, you have to shift back toward the front and engage the drive line in the front. So they designed a proprietary gear on this, it's a spline, sorry, it's a proprietary face spline. And in order to generate it, it had these 5-axis angles. So if you know what a dovetail cutter is, it had this reverse angles on the teeth, but they also pitched 10 degrees down, and the whole thing, when you look at it, you can't generate it with a dovetail cutter because you're also going down 10 degrees while maintaining the flat surface at the bottom of the part where the face is. So all of us looked at it and said, well, that can't be machined. And then one of my guys said, actually, if we put it on the 5-axis with a single point end mill, I can ramp in, and he showed me, and I said, oh. So we put all these gears on there, and we machined it exactly to their file. And they said, great, now we need you to check it. And I said, how do we check it? You gave me a math model, and I don't even have dimensions. What am I verifying? And they said, I don't know. So they said, I'll tell you what, we'll just take the parts and see if they work, and we'll tell you we checked it. I said, okay. So we made, 30, 40 of these parts. They took them, worked beautifully. Well, as happens in prototype, a year or two goes by, and another engineer from the same company comes to me and asked me to quote this new product, and I had this face spline on it, and this guy had this elaborate ball checking call out. He wanted to put a ball bearing between the two teeth, and if your dovetail was right, the ball would fall down to a certain height, and you check the height. And so it's a great way of checking it, but that doesn't really help when you're machining it, because you can't have this ball in there checking while you're machining.
Right.
So we make this part, and we check it on the ball, and the engineer says, well, I need to come to your shop because I don't think you made it, we were already done with the part of this one. He said, I don't think you made it right, and I want to come, prove that you made it wrong. And he says, I'm going to bring my boss. And I said, okay. It's always a fun phone call to get, that they're pretty sure they're going to prove me wrong, and they want to come with their boss. And so they came to the shop, and we have the part sitting on the table, and we show him what we did, and he looks at it and studies the data, studies how we checked it, and he says, well, yeah, it's right. And he pulls out a mating part, and he puts it in, and he says, it works right. And he said, that's amazing. He said, so here's the little secret. The boss who was with him has known Metal Mite for 20 years and knows me. Yeah. This other person who ordered it didn't know me. He was new to the company. He said, well, that's amazing that you were able to make this. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, I've talked around the company quite a bit since I've been there, and the rumor is that there's only ever been one shop that's made this part properly. And he said, I just took a gamble and had the quote sent to you, and I'm shocked that you now have made this part properly as well. And I said, oh. And then his boss starts laughing, and I said, what? And boss said, this is the shop that made the one successful. So the guy had heard the story from a year prior that we made the part, but didn't know it was me. So then they all got kind of a chuckle out of it. And I said, well, I guess we did it twice, right? So it means we're a little bit better than guessing here.
That's a great story. I just want to share with the audience that you have actually a really good section on your website under the blogs, which is where I got that question from. So the website for Metal Mite is actually MITE, so metalmite.com. And if you look at the blog from May 22nd, 2018, there's a great picture of 5-axis on face splines, a great example of a part with a face spline. And for me, these types of parts pictures are huge to understand what exactly you're doing, because the terminology is just not that common in my world. The equipment you have, you mentioned before, you have 5 and 6 axis. So I'd like to ask, what's the difference between 5 and 6 axis? And also, in general, what types of equipment do you have in the shop that other shops don't have that are essential for gears and splines?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have realized as I've gotten older that I probably need to get out more, because I don't know what other shops do and don't have. As people ask me that, I think it's been said that we get used to what we do and what we're capable of, and so when people ask us what we're not capable of, it's a hard question to answer. The difference between 5 and 6 axis, so a 5-axis machine in our shop is a 5-axis milling machine. So the mill spins the mill cutter, and it's on a bridge, so it has an X and Y grid on the top, and then the bottom, my guys affectionately refer to it as a toilet bowl. There's a circle on the back wall that rotates like a clock, forward or backward, and then there's a circle 90 degrees to that rotates. So it's a little bit different than the average machine you see on the market. We specifically bought this machine at the time. Morisiki bought it from a company called Deco Maho out in Germany. Since now, they've all merged. Now it's called DMG Mori. So Deco Maho Gildemeister Mori. So the 3 top German machine makers and the top Japanese maker have all have a conglomeration now to one manufacturer. So Deco Maho built this machine called the NMG 5000. What's unique about this machine is the other 5-axis has what's called a trunnion, And if you see that on Google, you'll see it's kind of like shoulders of a football player. You have these two big circles looking at each other, and then it drops down to a plate and another circle in between it. Very common on the Haas machine or Makino or some of the other manufacturers. Mm-hmm. That's a very rigid, strong way to machine, so that's why it's so popular. What our issue was, we weren't looking as much for rigidity. We were looking for accessibility because, as I said, we get into these very complicated angles and parts. I have a job, production job, which will lead you into your other question. Is you said you saw that I'm a prime contractor for the United States government, right. And you wonder what that meant. One of the jobs I do on the 5-axis is a tiny little plastic part that someone else injects, plastic molded part, and I have a fixture that one of my guys designed. I put it on this 5-axis mill, and it whirls around in all these crazy upside-down angles, and I drill and tap 5 holes. It literally takes less than 2 minutes. And what those plastic things are, they are the slides on our soldiers. The Marine Corps and the Army use these soldiers with these flip-down visors, like kind of like a welding mask. Mm-hmm. And these little plastic slides are the sort of the guide in between the visor and the helmet. And so naturally they came to me after they'd injected it. They said, we've injected the whole part minus these 5 holes, and now we can't finish it. And every shop in the world said it's not possible to do because it's all on these weird angles. So we created this fixture. We pop it in, the 2-minute op, we pull it out. So I literally take the lowest paid guy in my shop, and he comes up with a little clamp and just feeds it in and out every 2 minutes. And we run a couple thousand every couple months for him.
And how about the 6-axis?
So then the 6-axis takes the same concept, and then again, I bought a DMG Mori. It is a 5-axis head bolted between 2 lathes, if you're familiar with lathe and mill. So lathe, the part spins, the tool holds still, and so it's a sub-spindle lathe. You have a master chuck on your left and a sub on your right, and then in the middle of them, instead of a turret, you have a milling head. The milling head can also spin left and right 120 degrees in each direction. So you can actually go below the part and machine the bottom of it in the chuck. Wow. And then it tilts forward and back. So it's a little confusing to me, again, with the math, because when I think of axis, I think of axes rotating around an axis, you know. Yes. But the way they're counting that is you have the head, which goes 4-axis, and then you have the lathe spindle, which is on an axis, so it's 5, but then the lathe spindles, both master and sub, are also rotary tables that can go forward and backward, and so they count that as 2 different axes because they go both ways. And then because there's a main and a sub, that's where you get 5 and 6. So they're counting the axes of the part as it travels through the machine, if you picture it that way. Mm-hmm. So we're machining on one side, we're handing off to the other side, we're machining top and bottom, and so that's where you get your 6 axes machining in there.
So you mentioned the math several times. What CAM product or products do you use to program these machines?
Yeah, so that was an interesting decision as well. As I mentioned, when my dad started and he had to pick a machine maker of choice, he actually didn't pick Mori Seiki at the beginning. They were sort of the Cadillac or the BMW of the market. And being a smaller guy, he tried several brands. And at one point in time, he said he had 5 or 6 different brand of machines on our floor. And he said it was such a pain when a machine would go down, he couldn't even remember which company to call for the maintenance of it, because sure. And a lot of these brands aren't even around today, but back then it was Auto Numerics and, Hitachi Seiki and, all these different ones. So he finally, when he ran into the importer of Morisiki in Detroit, his name was Tony Iafredi. He said to Tony, Tony, I've got this issue. I've got these 5 or 6 machines, and they're all there, and I can't remember who to call, and they break down. And so Tony said, I'll tell you what, Mike, I'll sell you. I'll take all that crap off your floor, and I'll give you 3 or 4 Morisikis, and you make one phone call, and one of my guys will be there and fix any one of your machines. But I'm guessing, we're a little bit like the Maytag repair guy. We don't get a lot of calls, so. My dad said, great, you sold me on it. So we did it. So that was a major shift in paradigm for us as a small shop to say, let's just stick with one brand. Mm-hmm. But then in the mid to late 80s, we had the same issue bringing in these CAD CAM softwares. We had this SmartCam and Bobcat and all these guys coming on the market that all had different versions, and they all had a little, secret sauce that made them worth looking at. And one of the Morisikis we bought came with Gibbs Cam, and there was a guy named Bill Gibbs that actually created this, and he was a former machinist himself. So the way the software worked clicked in the brains of our programmers and made sense. So my dad said, you know what? Get rid of all the other softwares. We're going to use Morisiki machines, and we're going to use Gibbs Cam software. And so I was 25, 30 years ago. We've stuck with them since, and I have wire EDM in my shop. I have CNC grinding in my shop. I have the 5 and 6 axis and the 3D printer. We literally use Gibbs Cam for every one of those things. And I found when I hire people, if they have any type of other CAD CAM experience, I send them to like a 1 or 2 week training with Gibbs. And they're up and running just as fast. And then all my guys at my shop become a resource to help train that new guy. So for us, I've never been one to say, Morisiki is the best machine on the planet, and Gibbs Cam is the best, cam software on the planet. But I've said for my small business, I can't afford to have multiple versions right now. I have to have that be super simple.
Totally agree with you, Tom. We had the same philosophy at Rapid. We only had Haas machining centers for the same reason that I didn't want multiple brands on the floor. It does complicate it. Not everyone can run every machine. You put one manufacturer out there and it simplifies it. We use Mastercam, and they did a great job for us. Are they the best CAM software out there? It depends how you look at it. They just like Gibbs Cam, you pick one, and if it's gets you there, it may not be the most efficient in all instances, but if it does everything for you, then having one makes, in my mind, a big difference in how you are able to be more nimble as a shop. That's a great point. What other, you mentioned CNC grinding, you mentioned the Fellows machines before. What are those? Do you still use the Fellows? Is that still part of gear and spline making in part?
Yeah, so the Fellows shaper cutter, I actually sold that last year. Another interesting story, I was helping a customer out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. They make mining machines, little trucks that drive down in the mines, and these little spline shafts wear out all the time. So he sent me a similar thing, went to several shops all around. I guess that's a long way from Albuquerque to Detroit, but he went around, couldn't find a shop that could make this spline. I said, we can do that. So we made it. He said, how'd you do it? I said, let me send you some pictures. I showed him everything that we did on this fellow shaper thing. And so he said, can I buy the machine from you? And I said, well, why don't you just order the parts for me? And he said, I got these other projects. And he was a great guy, sort of reminded me of my dad. He was 80 and he had started this shop. And So anyway, I said, well, yeah, I said, you can buy these things off eBay. And he goes, no, I want yours, and I want it set up for my job, and I want it to come out here. So I just said, fine, it's, $11,000. And so he gave me $11,000 and, shipped it to Albuquerque. So I don't have it anymore. Today, how we generate splines, we actually, another interesting term for the Google listeners here, polygonal machining. So Mr. Fellows and Barbara Coleman and these guys that made the hobbing machine, again, if you ever see a hobbing machine, it's an amazing video if you can Google or YouTube that. The one cutter is spinning at an RPM, let's just say 100 RPM. Your part is spinning on a 90 degree, like in a lathe chuck, at say 100 RPM. This thing feeds in and out, forward and back, with everything rotating. The cutters, the parts, everything's rotating. And the splines are straight as can be, like straight. There's nothing curved on that part. And it's just amazing when you look at it, like how the timing of that has to be perfect. You can't mess that up at all. So those machines, up until just a few years ago, were the only ones on the market that could do that. The CNC world couldn't get the math right, and even if the math was right, they couldn't get the accuracy to make those two counter-rotating things rotate together. But now they've come out with polygonal machining, and a couple of the higher-end machines have this option. And if you see that on YouTube, they have a fly cutter like on a mill, and they have a lathe chuck spinning at like 1,000 RPM, and he feeds it in, and he cuts the Eiffel Tower. I mean, he literally cuts a shape that is like the Eiffel Tower with square corners.
Wow. And
it blows your mind. You just say that's not possible, And so taking that concept, we bought live tooling on our Morisiki NLs is a live tool lathe where you can have milling and turning. We bought hobbing live tool inserts, and that turned out to be a huge payoff, again, as your concept of why we buy something. It was like a $12,000 option, and I said that, that's just cool. We got to have that. So we bought it, didn't have a job for it. A month or so later, customer came and said, hey, we're trying to take the F-150 pickup truck, and we're trying to turn the future ones into all-wheel drive instead of four-wheel drive. So we no longer want the push button or the clunk. We want to be able to just seamlessly go, and the high-end Infinities and Acuras and all that do this, so they want the F-150 to do that. So they said, unfortunately, this one gear, the spline has to go in and then taper out on a 5-10 degree angle and then get larger, and the entire spline tooth has to go on that angle. And all the gear guys said that you can't do that. These Barbara Coleman and these fellows, they just go in and go out. You can't go on angles. And I said, oh, well, a lathe can do whatever we tell it to do. So we programmed it. We literally ended up running, I think, the first 10,000 parts for production as they proved this product out. But we just fed in, and then we tapered out and got larger. It was only possible through polygonal machining on that Mori lathe.
That's a great story of innovation, because technology gets invented, the polygonal machining, the ability to put the tooling into your existing equipment, and now you are creating parts, capabilities that didn't exist before.
Yeah, and that's really what we're seeing, Jay. When you ask why would I buy the 3D printer, we're seeing for the first time in a long time, there was kind of the technology, the bubble had burst. There just really wasn't a lot of new anything on the market. I mean, like I said, Henry Ford had gears in 1908, and we're using some of the same technology on the 2018 Grand Cherokee, and there's just not a lot of differences. But when I bought the 3D printer this summer, my son interned with me, and he's 19. He's a sophomore at the University of Michigan, and he is not an engineer. He's a business guy. He actually went there for actuarial science. He's a numbers guy, and So he came to work with me, and he had an iPad, and I guess that's how these millennials do it, right? They got the iPad
Right.
and the red jeans and the, whatever. But so he comes and I said, hey, I need you to just take the course on running this 3D printer. And he said, Dad, I'm not an engineer. My roommates are engineers, but I'm not. And I said, no, just do it and see what you can learn. In 1 week, actually, I think it was 3 days training, he was sitting across the dinner table from me with his iPad. He had downloaded some free cam software, and he goes, Dad, look, and he designed a Christmas tree with his finger, and he turned it into 3D, and then he printed it the next day at the shop, and he was holding the steel version of what he drew at the dinner table. And he said to me, he said, Dad, I'm going to go back to school in the fall, and my engineer friends spent all summer working at Starbucks, and they learned how to make coffee, and I just made a part on an iPad and printed it. And I said, that's the future right there. That's amazing.
That's a great segue, Tom. Your son now is, well, he didn't machine it, but let's technically call him the fourth generation machinist in the family. And perhaps you could just give us a little bit of the history. Your father started the shop in 1968, but it sounds like your grandfather was in the machining business before that, and maybe you could just give us a little history of Metal-Mite.
Absolutely. I'll try to condense it, but I think a lot of it's on the website, as you alluded to. But my grandfather was a school teacher in Pennsylvania. In 1940, a war was breaking out, and the whole world was involved in it. And his brothers moved to Detroit, and called him and said, "Hey, there's a lot of work here, a lot of things to be done." So my grandfather went and worked for a company that ended up doing pretty well called Textron. Mm-hmm. And he ended up having some ownership stocks in it during the war. And in 1945, 46, he took the buyout and he started a company called Ryan Industries. It was on Ryan Road in Detroit on Ryan and 5 Mile. And he became a prime contractor, which, you talked about it, we are as well, mm-hmm. which just means you're authorized to work for the United States government. You get what's called a cage code, and you can bid on contracts, or they can come to you direct and pay you to make something. And so he was making and designing Gatling guns and things that held cameras on the bottoms of airplanes and just all sorts of military things. He got into gears, quite a bit of gears. He ended up selling Ryan. I can't remember the whole story, but I think Textron bought out Ryan Industries as well. So they just kept kind of chasing him around there. And he again took the buyout money and started another company called Manor Industries, where he focused on the gears. And so when my dad was growing up in Detroit in the late 50s, early 60s, his job was to go around to shops that had broken gears from these manual machines, like this Fellows that we talked about and this Barbara Coleman. Mm-hmm. And they would literally run the machine until the gears shattered, into tons of pieces. My dad would reassemble it like a jigsaw puzzle on the floor of that shop while he was there, and take a pad of paper, and he would draw the gear, the diameter and the pitch and the gear teeth, and that's how he learned about gears. And then he would take it back, and my grandfather's shop would make these gears. There's a gear called a herringbone gear, which has two 45-degree angle bevel gears, and in the middle there's a gap. And regular gear cutters can't cut those because you get two 45s and they kind of come to an end. You can't do it. My grandfather was the first one in Detroit to have a herringbone gear cutter. Oddly enough, I just heard the story the other day. It's still being used today by a shop just outside Detroit in Warren. Wow. And it's amazing, to think about something 70, 80 years old still being a viable product. So in the 60s, my dad moved out of Detroit to Rochester, and he started his own shop in the basement, as we talked about it. So just one man, and he wanted to do the CNC route. My grandfather was already getting older at that time. He didn't think there was a future in the CNC, but he supported my dad in his efforts. and that's where my dad went through, as we talked about, made it almost 50 years. He just made it 45, and the cancer took him, and I joined him, 25 years ago, and we're carrying the baton a little bit further. So that's sort of the 3-generation shift, and how we've stayed in that loop.
When did you buy the business from your father?
So 2009, we had, it was interesting. I'm the youngest of 5, I guess I should add. So my 2 older brothers, my 2 sisters got married and moved out of town. My 2 older brothers were interested, but they, more true to following my dad's roots, they went out and started their own shops, and ended up, they're still in industry, but they've closed their shops since. So I was the baby. I was never supposed to buy my dad's business, but when my oldest brother had left my dad, I had just graduated college, so that's the kind of the gap between us. And my degree is in aviation. I was an A&P mechanic and a pilot, and so I said to my dad, I'm going to go work for American Airlines and fix planes and fly planes and do that. And he said, well, wait a minute, all my other sons left, and he was kind of looking at his succession plan and figuring that the last son can't leave here. So my wife and I had just gotten married, and he said, don't you want to start a family? And I said, yeah, I think that's part of the plan after you get married. And he goes, well, let's talk about. He said, let me teach you everything I know. In 10 years, you buy me out, and I'm out. And I said, oh. Okay, so I went back to my wife and I said, hey, what do you think about this? He wants to teach me everything he knows in 10 years, and then he's out. So that was 1999 that conversation happened. And then in 2009, I came to him and said, hey, guess what? It's been 10 years. And he said, yeah, you're right. And he said, I have no idea how to buy and sell a company. Can you figure that part out? And I said, sure can. So hired a great group of accountants and lawyers, and they appraised it, and we wrote the contract up, and we bought him out over a 10-year buy-sell plan.
So it sounds like that was a pretty smooth process. Were there any points of contention along the way?
For sure. I think, as typical, we talked about how we're wired as entrepreneurs and as small business owners. He wanted to honor his plan, and so he did. But a few years into it, he definitely started to, if we didn't have the contracts in place and we hadn't signed on it, I think he probably would have reneged, just because, what's the saying? You can take the boy out of Texas, but you can't take Texas out of the boy. So I think my dad was always an entrepreneur at heart. And
so that sounds like an important point. When you joined the company, you signed a contract, or you had a piece of paper that you both agreed to that you would buy the business in 10 years? It wasn't just verbal?
So no, when I joined in 99, we didn't have that. And every person I've taken to lunch and talked to since then, I've encouraged them to get that. So he, because my dad was a man of his word, 10 years later, we did the contract. That's when I hired the company to appraise, and he signed, and we did the 10-year buy-sell. But yeah, there was definitely points along the way where I could see my dad would have very much wanted me to, just go start my own, start from scratch, and he wanted to keep his baby till the end. So as it was, we started in 2009. And it was very unfortunate. Cancer hit my dad hard in 2011, and I ended up missing a lot of work. Thankfully, I have a great team at the company that was able to run it. But he and I spent 2 years going out to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and doing everything we could to try to beat the cancer. But in 2013, it finally took him. So it was very, very good that in 2009 we both had the good sense and the decency to sign the contract and go that way.
So it sounds like the first step was to find both legal and accounting help. How did you source those folks? What were the considerations how did you, maybe even step back, how did you know that was the right approach, that you had to get a legal and accounting team, CPAs, and then once you made that determination, how did you find those folks?
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting process. The whole world of mergers and acquisitions had never really crossed my dad and I's path. Obviously, my grandfather had some experience, getting bought out a couple times, but we did not, especially within family. I ended up just asking, the groups of guys in the area that I was friends with. I've been grateful to find a network of entrepreneurs and people that just by chance, I know that I think we had some conversation about the entrepreneur group nationwide that you can join, but I was able to just there was a couple dozen people I knew that own their own businesses, and my insurance guys and other people, and so I would just take these guys to lunch and I'd ask them questions. There's a company in the Detroit area called UHY, some CPAs and advisors, and some people said just call UHY. They'll do a company valuation and give you everything from a legal standpoint, and then get an attorney to do the documentation. And because it's a peaceful transition from father to son, there's no there's not going to be a lot of issue there. So at the end of the day, I mean, I think it costs us between $10,000 and $20,000 to do it, because it was peaceful. We had a great attorney, a small town attorney that does all of our legal work, that had also had some experience with mergers and acquisitions. He came to my dad and me together and said, listen, because there's 5 kids in the family and other people involved, he said, I want to do a couple things that might seem, again, abnormal, but it's very important that we do them. And I said, all right, well, let me know. He said, we're going to do a valuation. And for the sake of numbers, let's say, the company's worth $100,000. He said, we're going to value the company at $100,000. And then Tom, you're going to sign a contract to pay $110,000. And I said, okay, that sounds awesome. Why would I pay more than what we just appraised it for? And he said, as an attorney, I have done so. He said, once the founder dies, somebody, some ex-wife or somebody somewhere rises up and challenges the sale, and it's the easiest case for me to win if I pull out the documentation and say it was valued at this and he paid more, and here's the documentation that he paid over time. So my dad and I both said, oh, that just makes sense. We didn't foresee anybody challenging it. We said it just makes sense. So we got everything evaluated. We signed the deal, and we paid more than it was worth.
The terms, you mentioned 10 years. Was that suggested by the CPAs, or how was that arrived at?
Yeah, I believe it was either the CPA or the attorney that suggested that number. And essentially, we built a few things in, again, having guys that knew this process. Obviously, we didn't know my dad was going to get cancer 2 years later and then be dead, 4 years later. But in that, the attorney knew these things happen. So a couple things he built in. He built in a 10-year term, and then he built in an option that if my father had died before the 10 years was up, obviously my mother is still alive, but he said and then he had contingency if mother and father died in a car accident or a plane crash, whatever, then I had a 36-month option that nobody could challenge to buy the rest of the company. Okay. And then the way we did it, at the time the company was a C Corp, and we've now transitioned it to an S Corp, but a C Corp has a stock, And so the way we did the buy sell over 10 years was I bought stock.
Okay.
And so the attorney just said to me the day we signed, he said, now I had to essentially cash out my 401k and gave a deposit as much as I could, but even that was, I don't remember the numbers, maybe 15% owner of the company at that day. The attorney said, your job is to get above 51% as fast as you can.
Gotcha.
And I said, why? And he said, I need you to be a majority owner as fast. And at this point now he's representing me
Right.
as well. But he said, I need you to get above 51%. He said, in case anything happens. And sure enough, my dad got sick. So we very quickly got to, I believe, 85 or 90%. And then the building that the company's in, my mother and father owned separately. I also bought that off them on the same day on a land contract that was 10 years. And since then, again, good advice from the CPA, we had to pay that off sooner so that it would count as actual assets on my personal financial statement. So, yeah, I think, learning how to machine and how to solve problems in manufacturing was one part of it. The entire merger acquisition process was, I guess that'd be the MBA that I got in the second half of my career.
If you could do it over again, is there anything in the process that you would change?
Of course. I think if somebody said no, they're lying or not paying attention, or maybe both. But I think the biggest thing standing here today that I wished I'd done different is paid more attention to the debt and kept the debt to equity ratio in a better place. I think and that's what I was alluding to earlier, where I said, the ambition and the entrepreneurial spirit and the desire to buy without calculating ROI and this and that is great. You need to have balance. And we talked a little bit about the book Traction and
Yes.
Gino Wickman.
Yes.
In the last 5 years of my life, I read this book Traction, and I just loved it. I found the part that I was missing in the business. I don't have an integrator. I need, I guess in all the comparisons, I would be, Walt Disney or one of these guys that's, the innovator outside. Let's do it. Walt Disney would have gone bankrupt. I think he did go bankrupt, several times if it wasn't for his brother Roy, who almost nobody knows Roy Disney.
Right.
But Roy's the integrator, right? Roy was the one that was doing the ROI calculation and bringing Walt back down to earth and getting some of the business deals set up.
Do you have an integrator now?
So I did, unfortunately, past tense. I was a colleague of mine that he was a customer for 14 years at two different companies, one aerospace and one medical. And he came available about a year ago, and he actually is certified. So in the early days of Traction, Gino was also working with Chris Elias, who's the grandson of the Elias brothers from the Big Boy restaurants. Mm-hmm. And Chris Elias has a group in Detroit called Nexecute, and very similar conversation, very similar layout, where you have the innovator and the integrator, then you have the BHAG, the big hairy audacious goal. You set your rocks. You have your regular rhythm of meetings. So very similar. As I've read both, they're the same. My guy was certified in the Nexecute world, and he's an integrator for other companies. He's a consultant. So he came on board with me. We, just sharing some numbers out loud here, we had done about $5 million in annual revenue for a couple of years in a row at Metalmite. Last year, we cranked it up and beat that. It was our 50th year. We were very excited to have our highest revenue month, highest revenue quarter, highest margin. So we just were so excited. I said, we are going, traction 100%. Let's incorporate it. And then I don't know what's been going on in the Detroit area, but the last 9 months, we've been down about 30% from where we were even last year. So when I put together the forecast and the calculations of bringing on the integrator, we also hired some leadership on the shop floor. We brought in some other people. Suddenly, I just couldn't afford it all. So being the typical integrator that he is, he came to me 3 or 4 months ago and said, hey, I don't know if you're looking at the numbers, but we can't both stay. And I think the bank is going to require you to stay. So I think I'm going to have to step out. So he stepped out with grace, and obviously we still talk regularly. And so now I'm sort of stuck looking at, part of that conversation where you ask, what would I do different? That debt to equity ratio, if I had been paying a little bit more attention to that, I think that I wouldn't have gotten caught off guard with not having the equity to keep, the team that I wanted there. Some of the other issue, and I know as I've listened to some of your previous podcasts, it seems like it's a common thread, the succession plan and the transition of a shop. I have a great set of employees, and over half of them have had 20 plus years working for my dad, and they are as loyal as can be to my dad and to the company that they hired into. And so I think when the son, a lot of people in this area refer to them as SOBs, sons of bosses. When the SOB comes in and has these different ideas and starts, talking about things like traction and putting big posters of a tire, around the shop, I think they don't catch the excitement as much as I did. And so I think we sort of caught a clash of the new and the old guard. And so I had friends outside my business saying, "Oh, you just have to eliminate every one of those people that don't want to do it." And I'm like, "Holy cow, that's they're great guys. I mean, a lot of them mentored me as a kid." So I'm caught in this world of like, what do I do when they don't want to transition?
Right. And that's part of being a leader, is figuring out how to bring your team along.
For sure. We have, 9 guys in the next 5 years that'll be retiring due to age. And so again, as we started our regular rhythms of meeting, and we talked about our rocks, succession planning has been near the top of almost every conversation. And it's this crazy. I mean, I was sitting in a room 2 months ago with a group of guys running multi-billion-dollar companies, and people ask how I get invited to these meetings. I said I don't know. Maybe I wasn't. I just was in the wrong room or something. But I was in this room, and these guys literally said, "Are the rest of you having an issue hiring?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well," and they're trying to be very politically correct, but essentially, I just blurted out. I said, "You mean you can't keep millennials at your company?" And they all laughed and said, "Yeah, that's the issue. We hire these kids, and like 4 months later they moved to Bermuda or something. I don't know what's going on, and like we can't get a read on this." And I said, "Yeah." I said, obviously I'm a lot smaller than you guys, but I had that. I hired 2 guys. We were talking about these 5 and 6 axis machines. They got it. They had the gift, as my dad would refer to it as the gift. They got it. They had the gift. I got them trained on the CAD. They were making complex parts for helicopters and self-guided missiles and all the cool stuff we get to do. And then the one kid, was 20, 24 years old. He came to me and he said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm moving to Colorado on Friday." And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, was there an issue on the floor that I don't know about?" And he goes, "No, because I love everybody here." And I go, "Oh, okay." I said, "Did you meet a girl, or was there somebody in Colorado?" He said, "I don't know. I've never been to Colorado." I said, okay, do you have a job there? Do you have like an uncle that's going to hire you, or what's going on? He goes, no. He said, I'm packing up my truck and I'm driving to Colorado, and I just, I heard they have snow on the top of those mountains, and it just sounded cool. And I literally was like, I thought I was getting punked or I was part of some sort of gag. I said, well, I mean, some people just call that a vacation. I mean, just go for 2 weeks and snowboard and then just come back. I mean, what are you talking about? And he said, no, I'm dead serious. I got this cool idea. I'm moving to Colorado Friday. So he literally left. And then his buddy, the same age as him, hired in at the same time. He ran the 5-axis mill. I thought, well, at least, he had just gotten married and his wife was pregnant. And I thought, okay, well, at least I'm safe here. Like, this guy can't move to Colorado. He's going to have a baby. He's got a reason to stay at his job. No lie. He came to me 3 weeks later and he goes, hey, I just had a realization. And I said, what? I can't even imagine what realization you had today. And he said, my wife is pregnant, and in 9 months she's going to have a baby. And I said, I could have told you that. I had that talk with my kids, And he goes, no. He said, I realized that my mother lives in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that's 10 hours away. And I said, you just now realized that your mother lives in Chattanooga? And he goes, no, I put the two together. I'm going to have a baby, and my mom's in Chattanooga. My baby's not going to know her grandma. He goes, I'm moving next Friday to Chattanooga. And I said, you're kidding, right? And he goes, no. He goes, I have to be, I have to have this baby down there. I have to have it near grandma. So he moved literally 3 weeks later. So I just sit back and I tell that story to this group of guys who are a millionaire company. I said, guys, your guess is as good as mine. I don't think there's any test we can give these guys. I don't think there's any HR department that can help us. It has nothing to do with wage or benefit or vacation. Like, I don't get it. Like, I guess in Detroit we need snow-capped mountains and grandma to both be here, because that's the only way I'm going to keep these guys.
So you need to start figuring out how to hire the grandmothers so that the kids will follow.
Well, if you saw half the guys in my shop, I think their wives are the grandmothers. So that's sort of the dichotomy of what we have. But no, I say that because as you're familiar with Traction, and you and I have had that talk, the whole concept is looking at a business in sort of this 360-degree, maybe and then some, the 4 dimensions of a business. And so as we're constantly looking at, we do the SWOT analysis, what's our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats, and we look at everything. Succession planning, both in ownership as well as direct and indirect labor, is at the top of everybody's conversation. I mean, obviously it's at the top of these boardrooms at these multi-billion-dollar companies as well as my little company. And I don't have an answer for it. I know it's just an ongoing, one of my best guys worked until he was 74, finally retired this summer. I got that extra, maybe extra 9-10 years out of him, but he's one of the guys that just loved doing it. He just came in every day because he just, he loved the shop. But obviously that, that plan, I can't plan on everybody working to 74,
Right. So for the audience, referencing EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. Traction is the more formal name for it. And what Tom is referring to as a standard way of running your shop, and the way I equate it, we used a similar system, different but similar at Rapid, is that it takes all the information that's in Tom's head or my head as an owner and starts to push it out to the team so that you get the team more involved. And one of the big mechanisms is that it facilitates communication, because when I was an owner, I realized you think everybody knows what you're thinking about on both your managers as well as the people on the floor, but they don't. You really have to get it out of your head, put it on paper, share it with people, have honest debates about different things. And what happens is that your team does get more invested, and they become your partner. And for myself, and it sounds like for you, Tom, you start to really move forward because it's a whole bunch of people rowing now, and you're rowing in the same direction. So EOS is a fantastic tool to help bring the entrepreneur from the entrepreneur to team and to get that communication in place.
For sure. I mean, we've benefited on the small scale, and I've seen the examples of the large scale companies that have gained from it too. And I think the single biggest takeaway I got from it, and there's a series of books that complement the whole process, Good to Great with Jim Collins and many of the other stuff, the Rockefeller Habits. The biggest thing I've taken away from it is learning my blind spots, my weaknesses. So I was wired and built a certain way. Mm-hmm. It's not right or wrong. It's just a way. And there are people that can complement me, and we get a synergy from it. Where instead of it, the example they talk about, one of the books is the plow horses, they're called Clydesdale. One horse pulls 4,000 pounds. When you put two horses together, they pull 21,000 pounds. And so you do the math and you say, well, wait a minute. If one pulls 4, doesn't 2 pull 8? And no, the two horses together have a synergy, some sort of symbiotic relationship, mm-hmm. where they've literally got almost 6 times the amount of pull strength. So that's what I've seen. And like I said, I hope I get a chance to circle back and put that team together. But I've seen where my innovation and my leadership can go to a certain point, and just having a few of those key players around me can get us, to a better point.
Well, I think this is a great place to wrap it up. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I really appreciate, Tom, you opening up and sharing some of the things that occurred during the transition of the business ownership from your father to yourself. I'm sure there's many listeners out there who've lived through the same experience, and it's helpful for them to know that they are not alone with those challenges of a generational transfer. And for those listeners who may be planning for a succession on both sides, perhaps this conversation will help make it a smoother transition for them. For myself, I definitely now have a better understanding of gears and splines. And I will say it again, kids, don't try this at home unless you have adult supervision. Gears and splines are not for beginners. So anything else, Tom, you would like to add?
No, I just want to say thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and I really enjoy the show, so I'll continue listening as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on. And we mentioned Metal Mite's website before, but how else can they reach you, or is the website the best way?
The website is an excellent way. We've just spent this year redoing it. We have our quick 48-hour promise on the quotes request.
All right, Tom.
Media, Facebook, Instagram. If you just type in Metal Mite, you'll find us there. LinkedIn and Google as well.
And that's METALMITE. If you need gears and splines, Tom's your guy. Well, thanks for listening to another episode of the Job Shop Show. Until next time, keep those spindles spinning. Thanks.